Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Niefler. I'm from the Gübelin Gem Lab, and I would like to go through a couple of slides about the principle of origin determination in colored gemstones. Let's first look at what is actually influencing the value of colored gemstones, such as this beautiful big Colombian emerald, bigger than 200 carats. Obviously, what makes up the value is the identity. So is it indeed an emerald, or is it maybe just a piece of glass? Then the authenticity, is it indeed a natural emerald, or is it maybe a synthetic emerald? As you might know, most of the colored gemstones, or at least many of the colored gemstones nowadays, can be also synthesized. So they are kind of man-made counterparts that are basically having the same chemical composition, the same mineralogical crystallographical structure, but are of course fairly recent and not grown millions of years ago in the earth, and hence also rare. And most people still want to have the real thing, which is old and comes from deep within the earth. So authenticity, another factor that drives the value a lot. The condition, with condition we mean the presence or absence of certain treatments and what level of treatment that has been applied. As you know, treatments are usually applied to gemstones to enhance the color, to maybe improve the transparency, maybe even to stabilize the stone, and so on. Then the quality, self-speaking, you want to have a nice color, you want to have a nice transparency, a nice cut, you might want to have a bigger or a smaller stone. All these parameters are combined under the term quality. Of course, major influencer of the value of a gemstone, of what you are willing to pay for a gemstone. And then the origin, that's the topic of this presentation. From which place, from which country is a gemstone coming? And I'm going to elaborate of that in a minute. Then eventually also the context. So has the stone maybe a specific history? This is the card that many of the auction houses are playing. If the stone comes from a famous family, from royalties, that's then something that might also add to the history and hence to the value of a gemstone. In colored gemstones, specifically important is the conditions, or the presence or absence and type of treatment, and the country of origin. I want to give you an example on how the conditions or the treatment might affect the value of a stone. Here we have two stones. One is, the one on the left side is a 5 carat 14 ruby. The one on the other side, on the right side, is a 5 carat 62, somehow comparable in size. Both stones are natural rubies, so not synthetic rubies, but natural ones. The country of origin for both stones is Burma, nowadays known as Myanmar, and the value, so the price that a buyer was willing some time ago to pay for the stone on the left-hand side is 600,000 US dollars, whereas the other stone, the price that stone was traded for is only 30,000 US dollars. So a difference of a factor of 20 difference between the two stones that look fairly comparable, and in most of their characteristics so far are also comparable. And you obviously guess it, what makes the difference? The stone on the left side is untreated, whereas the stone on the right side has been heat treated, so it initially did not have that exact color or that exact transparency. It has been subjected to elevated temperatures to improve the color and maybe also to improve a little bit the transparency of that stone. That means that this treatment is reducing the value of the stone because the starting material was not as rare as the one on the left-hand side, which was kind of a natural beauty and didn't need any such treatment to bring up this nice color and this nice transparency. Let me give you a few examples about how the country of origin is influencing the value. This is from an auction house in Hong Kong, a bracelet with some 9 sapphires from Kashmir, natural sapphires from Kashmir. All stones are unheated, and the piece was sold for almost $7 million. The value of this bracelet is in the sapphires. It's not so much in the diamonds that you see in between. And then we were asking a couple of dealers that are specialized in this kind of goods to what price this exact bracelet in a comparable quality would trade if these stones would not have been originating from Kashmir, but if these stones would have been originating from another place such as Madagascar. And the uniform message we got is that the bracelet would probably trade for a price below $1 million. Although the stones might still be natural sapphires, still would be unheated, but just not having the same provenance, just not coming from Kashmir, but coming from another place such as Madagascar. So somehow the country Kashmir, the provenance Kashmir, seems to add to the value quite a bit. So why do people care about the origin, where a stone is coming from? Initially, it is probably because a certain origin, a certain country was linked to certain quality traits, such as the beauty of a stone. So we hear that, at least in the past, the Colombian emeralds, for example, were the ones that were famous for having the most saturated green color. We also hear that the rubies from Burma are the ones which were said to have the most intense red, I mean this kind of inner glow that is kind of not matched by any other rubies from other places. So it seems to be related with beauty, seems to be related with quality, and maybe also with rarity. If you think of Kashmir sapphires, such as the one shown here, the period, the time span during which Kashmir sapphires were found is very, very short. It's just a couple of years that this deposit could be exploited, then it got exhausted very quickly. So the number of stones that are around in the trade are very small. It's a small number, and hence it's also the prices went up. So it's a combination of undersupply, or indeed no supply anymore, and some kind of quality and beauty traits that come with these stones, which is explaining the high value of those stones, or also helps to explain the high value of those stones. Certain countries also might not be only directly related with the traits of the gemstone, but maybe also the country as such. You know, there might be certain associations that people might do with a country, a certain type of nature, a specific history that a country might have, foreign cultures that are adding to the appeal of gemstones that are coming from that place. Here, this is a nice example that our friend Vincent Pardieu has taken on a field trip some 10 years ago, or even more, 13 years ago, in the Himalayan mountains, various in different countries. This one here is in the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, and it shows how local dealers are negotiating the price of a gemstone under this cloth. So they have a certain system of touching each other's fingers, and as such, haggling on the price that the buyer is willing to pay for a certain gemstone. So stuff like that, the cultural specifics of a place might also add to the story of a gemstone, and hence to the value of a stone. It might also go into the other direction. This is an image taken 3 years ago in Bemainti, in Madagascar. There was a rush for blue sapphires, where within a couple of weeks, thousands and even 10,000 of people were flooding into an area in the search of blue sapphires. And this obviously had an impact on the landscape, as you can see here. There was some clearing of the forest was done. Obviously, that little creek that is running through that valley, little valley also got affected. After a couple of weeks, though, the rush was over. People did not find much stones anymore, or were not allowed to do the mining anymore, and then they were going out again. So we hear that nature was also recovering soon, and they're claiming back that area that was cleared by those miners. But obviously this is also having an effect on what kind of associations the end consumer and also the brands or the industry as a whole might make to a specific country. So what is the situation in the place where it gets mined? Is there any negative impact maybe that is done to the people or to the environment in a specific place, which then might also deter people from buying stones from that area? So that's what I just say. Consumers do associate countries with certain properties. Can be positive, can be negative. And these properties are affecting the willingness of a client to the price that he or she is willing to pay, regardless of the actual quality or beauty or authenticity properties that stone might have. And over time, some of these countries have developed into actual brands. Again, think Kashmir. Kashmir is now a brand, or has kind of become detached from the quality and is a brand in its own. So we see that stones that are of, say, moderate quality, but still they make a premium because they are from Kashmir. And the same with other with stones from other origins as well. And this is probably a mechanism that is not only observed in gemstones, this might also be observed in other goods, luxury goods or standard goods of our daily consumptions, that a brand might by itself add value and become eventually detached from the quality that initially was building the brand up. So I'm coming from a gem lab, and as a gem lab, we are also partially responsible for this, also the absurdities of this brand building that comes with the origins, because we keep serving the trade and the public with what they want, with the service of origin determination. What we can do is we can kind of try to do it in a proper way. To do it as good as possible, and also to kind of put more emphasis not only on the origin but also on the actual beauty of the stone. But this is not the topic of this presentation here. The topic here is about how to do origin determination. So I want to come to the main point, which is the concept of origin determination. This relies on a principal assumption, which is that the properties that we observe in a gemstone are the result of the geology and the geologic conditions that were present at the time when the crystal was growing. This here shows a nice ruby in a host rock of marble from Burma. And so the properties of this ruby, be that microscopic properties, chemical properties, but also structural, spectroscopic properties, are forcibly directly related to the conditions of the surrounding rock in which that ruby grew. So this is the way that we have to look at these gemstones. So whatever we observe in a gemstone, it is telling us something about the history, about the genesis, about the youth of this gemstone. So be that inclusions that we might see, be that the chemical composition, and I do not refer to the main elements or the side elements, I do talk about the trace elements, and also structural properties. So in as far as the crystal structure distorted or showing some kind of effects that again reflect the say geologic or structural situation in the place of growth. So whatever we look at in a crystal, in a gemstone, it is not random and it is not meaningless. We might not understand everything, but we have to take everything serious that we observe and try to give it a meaning. That's also why we believe that if you want to do origin determination, you might do more than just a standard gemmological training. You might have to get a certain understanding of earth sciences, of geology, of mineralogy, so that you can better interpret and make more sense of the things that the stone is telling us by its inclusions, its chemical properties, and its structural properties. The image that you can see here, in the center, is showing a beautiful multi-phase inclusion in a Colombian emerald. You see the bubble, the CO2 bubble, and you see two crystals of different the different phases in a little fluid inclusion in that stone. Beautiful picture. So I was pointing to the need that gemmological training alone might not be good enough. So we believe that if you are running an origin lab, you need to have other skills as well. You need to have solid knowledge of geology and mineralogy. You have to have a good understanding of crystal chemistry and crystallography, geochemistry. There are more and more sophisticated instruments used in top-notch laboratories today, such as laser ablation, ICP-MS. So you need to have a geochemist who understands what he or she is doing to avoid that meaningless data is produced, and to make sure that the data is properly created and also properly interpreted. It might even go into solid-state physics and material sciences, and also into certain mathematical and statistical methods. And I'm gonna come to that point later on. We're creating such a lot of data, and this data also needs to be evaluated and interpreted in a statistically robust way. And then there are other areas, if it goes into the interpretation of organogenic gem materials, such as pearls, such as coral, then you might even need to have some biological knowledge, or even other areas of science such as history or archaeometry that might be useful when it comes to the skills or the demands that you have in a gem lab. So the basic approach that we are embracing when we want to do origin determination is that we are comparing the unknown with the known. So before we start, we have to basically study a lot of stones of which we know what they are. So in context with origin determination, this means we have to have a reference collections of stones covering all commercially relevant deposits worldwide. We have to get a significant number of stones from these places, and we have to be sure that they indeed come from that place. Then we have to study them, and once we have done that, once we have a good understanding of the properties of those stones, we can then go to the unknown stone, collect the properties, analyze the stone and look at the properties of that unknown stone, and then compare these properties with the properties of the known stones. Here we see a little so-called triplot, which is showing the relative concentration of different trace elements. On the top you see boron, on the left side bottom you see zinc, and on the right side bottom you see magnesium. And in this triplot, we have different population fields, which shows the spread of the ratios of these three elements per origin. So you see a green field covering Sri Lanka. You see the gray area, which is showing the Russian alexandrites. On the very left bottom corner, you see a small area with the Brazilian alexandrites from hematita. Then you have an area, a blue area, which is pretty much overlapping with Sri Lanka, showing Ilakaka. The yellow field in the middle is Tanzania, Lake Manyara. you have India on the right side, and you have Madagascar on the bottom. And you see there's quite a bit of, or some overlap in these population fields. So we already see that only looking at these three elements might not be good enough in all cases to determine the country of origin. Let me elaborate a bit on the concept that we use. So the foundation of the work that we are doing and that we hope everybody is doing, that is doing origin determination, has to build a reference collection. This reference collection, as I mentioned, has to consist of authentic samples, so you have to be sure that it's indeed coming from the place where you believe or where you assume it is. So ideally you go there yourself and collect the samples yourself, or you have trusted sources and you have multiple cross-checks when you get from different sources so that you can compare that the properties are the same. Then you need to have the experience to do all the tasks related to it, from the collection of sample to the analysis of the stones to then the evaluation of the data. You need to have the expertise also, what I was talking about before. So that's kind of the basis. That's basically the fundament you need to have. Then when it comes to the different analysis that we are applying, we basically group them into three pillars. The first pillar is the microscopic feature, or the traditional gemmologic features, which might include specific weight and a refractive index or fluorescence. Then in the center you see the second pillar, which are spectroscopic features. So here we deploy different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, such as ultraviolet, visible, near-infrared wavelengths. We might apply Fourier transformed infrared spectrum. Raman spectroscopy might go into that column. And then we have the chemical column, the chemical fingerprint, which is taking care of the trace element chemistry and the ultra trace chemical elements that are giving us a fingerprint, so a pattern of these elements that then can be compared with the reference collection. The three pillars together, then the data that we collect with these three different groups of analytical methods, then can help us or can lead us to a conclusion. The aim is to collect large sets of data. So we are strongly suggesting to not only use one of these pillars, but to use as much method as possible. The bigger the data set we are collecting, the more robust ultimately the interpretation is, and the more resilient the system is in case you're going to make a wrong observation or a wrong interpretation of one feature. If you only have 2 or 3 or 4 observations, then you depend too much on the correctness of each of these 3 or 4 observations. So these are the reasons why collecting a lot of data is good. As I mentioned before, if we're going to make a wrong interpretation, or if you're going to make a wrong observation, even then it has much less of a negative effect if it is just one observation out of many. So the robustness is increasing. We have a better repeatability, we have a better consistency, and the system is also more resilient when we have a large number of possible countries of origin, and hence overlapping properties of the stones coming from these different sources. Now, collecting a large number of data also implies that we have to deal with a large number of data. Sometimes on a single stone we are collecting up to 100 or even more different data points, and we might have to deal with the reference collection, or might have a large number of data in itself. So we might have hundreds of reference samples from one origin alone, and that makes it pretty difficult then to compare it just by looking at the data, and the properties of one origin might have a certain breadth, you might have a certain heterogeneity of the properties. And to deal with that, it might become really tricky for the human eye, for the human brain, to deal with such a large number of data in a consistent and reliable way. So it is compulsory that we are applying certain help, that we are using certain help, such as with statistical methods and algorithm, so that we are looking into comparing patterns rather than only comparing individual properties. This is just to give you an idea how confusing and how complex a picture could look. Here we have two chemical elements on the x-axis and the y-axis. It doesn't matter which elements these are. And we have here some data points of different possible origins from blue sapphires. And as you can see, it's difficult to discern different, say, clouds, different areas per origin. It seems to be quite a bit of overlap, and this the yellow square that you see in the middle of this diagram could be 2, 3, 4, 5 different origins. So that basically tells you that just looking at two elements is simply not good enough. That would not do the job. Let me talk about the reference collection. This is the most basic layer of the building that I was trying to draw before. At the Gübelin Gem Lab, we are in the lucky position that we have a very complete and a very large reference collection. It has been, the basis has been started in the middle of the last century by Dr. Gübelin, who has traveled many places and who has started a consistent collection of reference stones. And since his times, we have then continued that collection, which by now grew to up to, I think, 28,000 stones. And these 28,000 stones, they cover all commercially relevant sources of colored gemstones worldwide. Here you see some of these boxes, in one of our safes. We have 2 safes full of those boxes. And in each of these boxes, we have some 100 to 200 samples that we know exactly where they are coming from. These samples are documented properly, and the data are fed into a database which we maintain on a regular basis. We are also conducting regular field trips to visit mines, again, that we have maybe not seen in the last couple of years. We are usually very quick in visiting new mines as soon as we hear that new mines are going up, so that we can remain complete in our reference collection, and also hence that we can remain sure, reasonably sure in the work that we are doing on client stones. It also has to include, of course, the different type of synthetic stones. It also has to include the different type of treatments. So to get these stones, obviously we do not have to do field trips as such, but we have to kind of contact the treaters and the synthesizers out there in the world and make sure that we get those samples, and can also study and document them so that we can recognize them when stones are coming to our laboratory. Let me come to the conclusions. The origin determination remains a value driver for colored gemstones, or at least some type of colored gemstones. Origin determination is not a trivial task. It has limitations. Everybody that is active in the trade knows that. There are sometimes conflicting statements. There are stones where labs, including the Gübelin Gem Lab, cannot determine the origin, and it requests quite a range of specific prerequisites, such as a certain expertise, not only in gemmology, but in earth sciences, in material sciences. It requests a broad range of analytical methods. Think of the 3 pillars that I've showed you, the microscopic pillar, the spectroscopic pillar, and the chemical pillar. And if a gem lab wants to do origin determination on colored gemstones, it has to be fully fledged with all these, with the full arsenal of analytical equipment, because it helps to make the result more credible and more robust. Then origin determination is nowadays, it has become too complex that it can be done by one person, by one expert alone. It requires teams of specialists working together. So we are kind of not sure if the one-man laboratories or the de facto one-man laboratories where one person is taking a decision, is still fit to do origin determination, because the task has become too complex that one person alone can deal with the complexity. And then, of course, you need to have a complete, fully documented and well-maintained reference collection. This obviously comes with an ongoing investment to do fieldwork, to go to the mines, to study, to get samples on site, authentic samples, and also to study the local geology. If you don't do that, if you cannot fulfill these specific prerequisites, then it's rather a guessing game, more speculative than indeed a determination. So that was it, basically, my little walkthrough through the concept of origin determination. I thank you very much for your attention. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you have further questions, and check out for other little movies that we might do in the coming time. Thank you very much.